Hello, everyone. Welcome to the DocFest Exchange. I'm Lucy McDowell from the Wellcome Trust, Broadcast Games and Film team. A bit about Wellcome Trust. We're a global charitable foundation who are fundamentally interested in helping great ideas to thrive. And what better place for great ideas than the DocFest, frankly? Great ideas, creativity and experimentation. Now, this morning, we have dance filmmaker Alex Reuben, who himself has received a Wellcome Award to help him bring together dance and science. And with him, previous Wellcome Trust Public Engagement Fellow, Erinma Ochu. And this morning, they're going to be discussing a film that was on last night, Mr Gaga. And over to you.
Thank you, Lucy. One of the things that we do with these early morning sessions is talk a little bit about what else we saw last night. But I just wanted to check in about the Orlando shooting that I heard when I got back into my room. I was kind of a bit shocked and horrified by it. So just to just think about that for a moment and that LGBT community and how they've been affected. I read online that if you know anyone in America who's nearby, they can donate blood, and the community want to have a vigil and to celebrate the lives of the people that were lost. So just, you know, if people ask what can we do, we can donate money to help out on that. So without further ado, talking about Mr Gaga, which we went to see last night. Alex, you come up from London. How have you been enjoying DocFest? You've been here a couple of days?
It's my first time and really enjoying it a lot, and so much to see, and also the conversations and making films. I often work alone all the time, editing on my computer, and all of a sudden you can talk to, for example, yesterday with yourself and scientists and filmmakers and all sorts of people. So really stimulating and some really wonderful films, including the one we're talking about.
So I thought I don't know if anyone here has seen Mr Gaga last night. Oh, did? Excellent. But for others who haven't, let's show the trailer. So Mr Gaga, it's fantastic to be able to see it on the big screen. We had watched the film before, so that the Heyman brothers, so Tamar the director, and we had Barack, his brother, who's an incredibly animated character. We invited him to come and join us this morning, but he hadn't made it along. But this film took, they said, quite a long time to come to fruition. So 25 years in the making, which is incredible. If you do get a chance to see it, if it gets released generally, then I would really highly recommend that. But so kind of Ohad Naharin, the artistic director of this dance company in Israel, one of the interesting points was he's developed this language, which he calls Gaga, which is a language of dance that he gets many people involved in, and it looks like a kind of an improvisation to elements of that dance that people are able to express themselves. But as a choreographer, he seems to be a very controlling character. He has these kind of contradictions in the film. So I just wanted to hear a little bit about your impressions of Ohad as a kind of the character in the film, and thoughts around him about his work, but relating that back to yourself as a dancer.
Well, I'm not a trained dancer. I'm a disco dancer. So I was a DJ before, and I learned about dance really through dancing in clubs and through martial arts, through qigong and kung fu. And I can completely identify with. Some people see his work as arrogant because he's quite dictatorial the way that he works, and he's very heavy. But he also gives complete freedom, and I think the magic is where the two meet. It's the combination of the viscerality, and he's almost very aggressive. But if you see him dance, he's very fluid. He's very what he calls himself a very feminine dancer, and I think it's that contrast that makes what he does magic, and the film perfectly captured that. I mean, really incredibly, and also. The film portrayed these contrasts in a way that it showed him as a whole human being, and that you don't have to just be one thing or another, and took away a lot of dance stereotypes, you know, there's this dance can sometimes have an extreme stereotype about, for men and women, about how dancers and choreographers are, and it showed a rounded character, which I thought was really great.
There was a great story that the producer told last night about how Thomas, the director, came to get interested and want to make this film, and he'd been offered tickets to see a dance performance, and he was just like, "No, I'm not interested in dance. Why would I go to that? You know, that's not for me." And yet, going along to performance, was absolutely transfixed and said, I need more tickets. I need 2 this time to come back and see it again. So that kind of stereotyping around dance and who it's for and who it's not for. Have you got?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, I probably learnt about movement through playing a lot of football, you know, and that does teach you about spontaneity and improvisation and fluidity. And then all of a sudden, kind of not to be able to identify necessarily with contemporary dance or certain forms of dance doesn't mean you don't like dance and movement. And so I think another thing the film shows is you have to have a broad idea of what dance can be. And I particularly like the links that were illustrated in Ohad's attitude to combining political thought and movement and dance, and there was a lot of that in the documentary. If you get a chance to see it, I really recommend you see it, because it shows it's part of our real life. Just like I don't see a big difference between football and the way a team manages to string a load of passes together in a total movement, and a way a choreographer puts together a team of dancers to create movement. This is still skill and improvisation and design.
And there's a couple of scenes in the film where you see Ohad dancing with maybe 200 people, possibly 100, 200 people, and they're all doing this improvised language. And just to see that and how it spreads and how infectious it is quite powerful. What would be good is to show a clip from one of your films, but let's introduce it so that people have a sense of your work. So tell us about the clip that we're about to see, and then tell us a bit about your work.
Okay, so this is a clip from Roots, Dancing to New Orleans, which was released by Picture House Cinemas. And when I was a DJ, people asked me where I learnt to dance, and I didn't know. So I went to the Deep South to find out. And so I did a road trip from, just on my own with a camera and a microphone and a car, and I did a road trip from the Appalachian Mountains all the way down, so through North Carolina, Mississippi, down to Louisiana and New Orleans, and Hurricane Katrina happened at the same time. So even at the backdrop to this clip, which is in Memphis, there was Memphis was having a huge influx of evacuees, and there was a massive feeling there because the residents of Memphis also felt kind of twinned in a way and felt for New Orleans.
So just tell us the title of the film again.
Roots, Dancing to New Orleans.
So one of the things that in watching Mr Gaga and knowing about your work, there seems to be this the way that you're making the film. So kind of thinking of this the way that you've shot this, and thinking back to the Omar's work as a choreographer, there are kind of similarities, I thought, in those two forms of expression, and you're building it into the camera and the way that you film dance. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that particular shot and how you shoot that work.
It's a good point. Well, I think it's the viscerality. His work's very dynamic and very forceful and very sensitive as well. And I think when like I'm on my own with a camera and a microphone in this situation, and also some parts I was like 80 foot up in the air with a sheer drop behind me, nothing behind me. And then I realised, like, travelling alone and being knackered, I'd come out with one battery with 35 minutes left on it to shoot the whole of everything I was there, which is impossible. And so you have to shoot really quickly and carefully, but at the same time, when you're using a camera and a microphone, you're dancing as well. You know, you're almost a performer that's in that situation. And so it's quite frantic, but it's a frantic atmosphere. And so you're almost dancing with, if it makes sense, you're dancing with the camera and with the microphone. And I don't like when I work with a crew, which I didn't hear obviously, but when I do, I have to almost unteach a sound person how to record sound, because I want a dynamic sound that's moving, a little bit like if you're dancing in a club, you know how the sound changes everywhere you go because you're moving your head. The sound isn't constant like you get in regular films. And so I think that physicality about how I'm making and how that's a quite aggressive form of filmmaking in some way, it's a bit of an effort to watch, isn't it? It's like, you know, if you can imagine that for a whole, not all the films like that, by the way, some's very calm, but, you know, there's energy in it, and there's energy in the filmmaking, and I think this is a really good point, the connection that you made.
And then I wondered about, we had a story about the editing process last night, and I was kind of astounded that the film was edited 3 times before they said, okay, yeah, we've got completely edited and re-edited 3 times over. And I thought, wow, that's exhausting. It's so funny because the filmmaker that I work with has just walked in and, okay, we've edited a film and we've edited it twice. And that was and that was a short film. But that editing process, that you have a film that's made several times, we talked about this having watched the film. What were your kind of thoughts on why you would go through that process of editing a film 3 times until you're completely happy with it?
Well, I completely understand, and I know it's a nightmare for funders and for film festivals and cinema groups, because you finish something and then you show it to an audience. This I showed first to an audience at Sadler's Wells before it went to cinema. It sold out. Everyone thinks it's a finished film, and it got really good reaction, like really, really good. And to make it worse, my mum really liked it as well. and I was in it. Maybe that's why she liked it. But I was in it dancing, and it had voiceover. And so there had this great reaction, and literally, 10 minutes after I finished, I thought, okay, that wasn't the film I wanted to make. And so I went back and I cut me out of it, I cut the voiceover out of it, and the film became too short for a normal cinema release. And I sent it to the cinema group, and within 3 days they just emailed back and said, oh yeah, we want to show it, we want to put it on. No connections, no festival, no nothing. I don't really move in those circles. So I completely understand it. And then when I did that, I thought, yeah, that was the film I set out to make. It became more like DJing, and the language became cinematic. You know, documentaries can also be completely cinematic, and cinema is not a language of words. You know, it didn't start off with words. So I love words, but it can also... So I completely understand it, and that process took some years. You know, took from beginning to commissioning in 2005. It went into the cinema in 2008, and that's actually short for me. Yeah. And I think in science, for example, there's a movement called... there's a new movement called slow science, where top scientists are resisting pressures to publish papers and not to be able to make mistakes. You know, you need to make mistakes, like I felt I made a mistake. And I think the documentary making process can also be over many, many years. The Maya Angelou brilliant documentary yesterday was also made over many years, and Mr Gaga was. And that's a problem, because funders can't afford necessarily to fund you for
25 years of funding to make a piece of work. Yeah. But going back to the editing process, so Barack, the producer, said that he walked into the edit suite and he, as someone who doesn't love dance, I think he even said he hated it, he wanted to put in some tweaks in there that would enable this to be a film that is also appealing to a non-dance loving audience. So to be really clear that all of the you hit, I don't want to do a spoiler alerts on the film because I'd love you to watch it, but there's some really human love stories that happen in there, and some heartbreak and all kinds of things like that. He wanted to make sure that was in the film. You don't work with a producer in that way, but you've used the editing and process of watching the film to get that kind of feedback from an audience.
Yeah. I never watch my films myself, but as often as I can, I sit in the back of a cinema and watch it, because you get a sense of how an audience feels that's like no other. And when you see it big, I don't have my films on the internet, for example, because it's not because I love the internet, it's just I'm making something that's physical. And you need to, you heard how loud the sound was there. You need to feel that sound like you would in a club. And you need to feel the physicality of the dancers like they're in front of you. And then in science, there's something called kinesthetic empathy, where part of our brain is, when we're watching something, thinks that we're doing it. And it's always active. And that's how we also learn. But it's also why, we have things like obesity and so on growing, because part of our brain that would normally be satisfied by movement is being satisfied by looking and listening. And so, I make decisions according to the film changes when I see it in an environment. So all of you, if anyone's working on a film at the moment and they want to show it to as many people as you can, as often as you can, in private kind of test screenings or whatever you want to call them, because I think it makes a massive difference to your final result.
And I'm going to come to the audience to ask questions in a moment, but I used to executive produce a slate of short films for the now non-existent Film Council. And one of the things that I would have with filmmakers is we'd argue a lot over tiny things that you'd notice in a film. You think, if you were to do this, you'd see something slightly different. And we'd have this argument with the filmmakers, and they'd be like, no, I'm not changing it. I say, okay, we're going to watch the rough cut in a cinema with some filmmakers who are your kind of idols, potential mentors, and watching the film with other people, they're suddenly going, okay, that needs to go, change. And that changed the way that I would give feedback to directors for them to kind of really see their film with an audience. I think it does make a big difference. But the other thing about us watching the film together last night, were there things that you noticed that were different from having watched it on a small screen?
Oh, completely. Well, Erinma mentioned the colours, which when you picked up on that, I thought, oh yeah, that's having a big effect on me. But it's an edit changes when it's big. Okay, so like if you're editing on your laptop, try and make sure that you at least have another monitor. It's so crucial. And then when you see it in a cinema, which is what I'm making for, then it changes again. And it changes the speed and your perception. I mean, how you actually perceive things and when they hit your eye and your ear is different in a cinema than what it is to your laptop or to your computer. And so just on an aesthetic level, that affects how you feel the narrative, where a cut comes, how dramatic it is. If the sound slightly comes in before the next shot is different in a cinema because you might have surround sound. And cognitively, when you're doing that, you're making an assumption about where you want the audience's head to be when that next shot is coming. So if you bring the sound in slightly before, they're kind of being prepared for this next little sound, if that makes this next scene, if that makes some kind of sense. So I think it was just the dance was so much more beautiful when you saw it. And I don't know if you felt that. It was more
visceral.
Beautiful.
You could feel it, but I felt the colours from the film really stood out and kind of popped out, that you could then really notice the way, the movement of the dancers, and that what you said about being able to see it and respond to it. You're feeling that you want to move watching this film, which I thought was quite interesting. But I wanted people to come up with some questions, and whilst you're thinking of a question, you've been working with a neuroscientist, Chris Frith, on your next film. Tell us a little bit about that, and why neuroscience?
So I'm doing a film called Gingerella Rockefeller, which is an improvised film about improvisation. It's for cinema. I'm interested in what makes us dance, why we dance, and when I made this film, I looked a lot at how the connections between one form of dance, like jazz dance or like British stepping and so on, and how they were related. And I found that it was culture and politics, slavery, colonisation that affected the way that we move and dance. But through looking so much at the outside of the body, it made me interested in what's going on inside the body and what's going on inside the brain, and how we move, how we make the decision to move, what and why and how are we moving in a certain way. So I created a story where about a dancer who's lost the will to dance and goes off to talk to neuroscientists and so on. But it's not a documentary. It uses documentary footage. It's shot in the Amazon and Iceland and Budapest and the UK. And so she sort of, in her mind, roams around these places. And I use the Cinderella myth because across cultures for not just centuries, thousands of years, this myth has existed in different forms independently. So I was interested in what is it about us as humans that have these very few myths, really, that seem to connect us all, and why. So that's...
So in the same way we might think about storytelling, this motivation to dance is also something that we might see throughout all human cultures. Is that what you're trying to get at a bit?
Yeah, I mean, babies' first sounds are said to be musical, and in a way we're used to seeing, put music on and babies start to dance, don't they? They want to wriggle about straight away, and I think this is, dancing on the whole makes us happy, so why? What's going on, and what is it about this form of expression? And we live in a culture that, for me, is becoming too word-orientated, too intellectual, particularly in the West. And I mean colonised cultures as well that have a European tradition, like South America. In the middle to upper classes, it's becoming something very intellectual. And we're making a mistake when we think language is our only, talking is our only language. And the same in cinema and documentaries. I saw another documentary, Zud. Anyone see Zud? And that had very few words, and it was just as valid as a documentary. It was set in Mongolia.
Yep. Let's see if we've got any questions. Have we got any questions? Yeah, one at the back. If you could wait for the microphone, thanks.
Hi, thanks very much for this talk. It's really interesting. I just wanted to ask a question about your relationship with the Wellcome Trust and how they support you in developing the science aspects of your films.
Well, I had have a small arts award, and I'd already actually in my proposal my proposal took about 2 years to create. So I'd already identified the scientists I wanted to work with, and so the Wellcome Trust supported me by funding me. They supported me to develop those relationships beyond what I'd done already, and that was really important. And also, you get to go to open days and forums, and you can give a lot of feedback and meet quite a few people and make new connections. But I can only talk about my case, and I'd identified over many years, even before that 2-year period, because it takes a long time to find the right collaborators. But how they've supported me since starting the award is that of the 3 collaborators, scientists that I'd identified, one became very important, and the 2 took a much sort of... In fact, one of them, I realised that the good work had been done already in writing the proposal. And there's no pressure. I have freedom, and it's one of the reasons why I've turned down funding, for example, from commercial or independent companies and so on, is because I have creative control and I'm supported in that, and I don't have a pressure. And you need that, I think, to be creative. So one of those scientists, Chris Frith, who's I don't know if some of you have heard of him, but he's a very good neuroscientist, cognitive scientist, and he became much more even than just a collaborator, and the Wellcome Trust supported me in building that, really, just by the funding and the freedom and the support when I needed it.
And I should say one extraordinary thing is Wellcome Trust have funded some biomedical research scientists to come to DocFest and explore the festival. So we've got a virologist, someone researching Alzheimer's, and they're about. I can't see them in the room at the moment, but we've got some people that are exploring DocFest as scientists, but they also have other passions like music and other things. And I think that's quite extraordinary that you have funders that will encourage that crossover and support, and that's part of what these sessions are about. But I wanted to take some other questions, so we've got one at the front here.
Hi there, thanks. It's been really interesting so far. I'm somebody that's a filmmaker and artist and also does work with dance as well. And I loved the film last night, couldn't love any better. But I wanted to hear more about the Gaga movement in the film. I just wondered whether you felt the same or...
We had a conversation. It's kind of an interest. I was kind of looking at it and thinking, when I first watched the film, I was really inspired and excited by the idea that there's this movement and a language around, to think about it as another language and a form of language, and that there's the possibility to get that out and to spread that. When I watched the film again tonight, and I really felt, there's a moment in the film where the mother of Ahad's child, she's one of his dancers. There's a moment in the film where he asked that the dancers really give themselves over to him and to translating his work. And she has to decide between being a mother and being with her child and dancing. And in that moment, it kind of really made me question a little bit about the spread of his movement and the language of it. So I was kind of, my impression of how language and culture spreads kind of changed a little bit when I watched the film last night. So I'm still a little bit in conflict, if I'm honest. And we had a bit of a conversation about this. So one way that you, if you're wanting to get things out there, you can have a kind of one-way communication and kind of, it's a more controlled, okay, I want you to do this. But then equally, you can put things out there and see how people respond to that. And so I wasn't seeing this kind of response. I felt it was very directive and very directed. And that made me question it a little bit, especially because it's kind of coming from a male authority in a position of incredible power. So I really I felt something of that last night. So I'm kind of unsure, I'm conflicted in it, but it's a really good point.
But, I mean, my take specifically on the Gaga movement, for those of you that haven't seen it, it's a form of expression where he encourages people, and it's spread around the world, to move very very freely and just to express themselves to sound and music and to really let themselves go. And now there's been tests done to see if this has a scientific effect on the body, to see if it helps therapeutically, and people think it does. And I do Qigong. From my perspective, I think it's fantastic. And what's important about it is any form of movement and expression will help, your health. And there's a part where he's working with people with learning difficulties and physical disabilities, and you can see the wonder and how that's having a very positive effect. And this is really important, just to encourage. It doesn't matter, I think, if it's Gaga, but if it's Gaga that's doing it and making that more common, that's fantastic. But the other thing is, I think the underlying sense of what he's doing is there's a subtext, and the subtext is let yourself go, improvise. It's political almost. It's like, he's saying that our bodies are important in what we do with them and how we express ourselves in the world. Like, in my films, it's about the environment and politics. Like, they affect the way that we move. And people shouldn't be scared to express themselves. And I think when you see the Gaga movement, it's like abandon, isn't it? It's like free abandon.
And so there's a difference between how he expresses it with amateur non-dancers versus his professional dancers. I think we're very close to having to come to a close, but Alex is going to be around if there's going to be any further conversations. It'd be great to have this dance connection here that's started up. Thank you so much for your time. Just to let you know that we're in the DocFest Exchange every day to the end of the festival. So at 12:30, Sharon, I've completely forgotten.
Don't worry.
Miss Sharon Jones, the film that was screened last night, we're going to have a conversation about that with broadcaster Karen Gabe. That's at 12:30. And then we have at 5 o'clock tonight, I should say, we're changing the time slightly, a conversation between Ingrid Kopp and Anna Higgs from Nowness. And I'm really excited to hear that conversation. So home from home of the festival, come back, we've got food, we've got coffee, we've got interesting people to chat to. Thanks again.
Thank you.